Hello everyone, Małgorzata Bonikowska, President of ThinkTank, partner of Masters and Robots Conference. Welcome in this series of short talks. And today we have a special guest, Leesa. Leesa is there. Hello, good morning.
Hi, how are you? Good morning.
Good evening, I should say, because you are talking from Singapore, right?
Yes.
So it's late. Leesa is specializing in business education, and she works at university in Singapore, teaching business, teaching about business as well, and new technologies, of course. Everything on Masters and Robots evolves around new technologies and new normal now, after pandemic is over, hopefully soon. And we would like to concentrate in this talk on education as such, education of business people, leaders, managers, those who have to take decisions, but also those who don't know this new normal yet, and they have to somehow catch up quickly with the new reality. So Leesa, the obvious question would be, what, in your opinion, is the lesson from this pandemic times for education system and for education as such, how we learn things?
Yeah, it's a great question. So thank you, first of all, Margarita, for the opportunity to contribute to this dialogue, because I think it's a fundamental one. COVID has really displaced education. It's displaced us as a civilization that provide equal opportunity on an academic campus. And unfortunately, due to COVID putting people back in their homes, what that means is that before, everyone on campus was reasonably on an equal footing. You lived in the same location, you ate at the same restaurant, you accessed the same academics, the same library. You really had an equal opportunity to access education. But thanks to COVID-19 and people now having to do that from their home, just think about the US. Some people are homeless. Some people don't have access to the internet. Many people don't have access to sustainable food within their communities. They're living out of their cars in some of the lower socioeconomic communities. And unfortunately, these students have been forced to go home. And so they've lost the opportunity to be included. So there was a discussion I saw that more than 100 million people are going to slide back into abject poverty thanks to COVID-19, simply due to healthcare. I would argue that many people are going to slide back into poverty simply now due to an inaccessibility of education. Now, there's an argument, as you know.
What you're saying, because you are talking to us from Asia, of course, not Singapore, which is a very advanced economy, but other countries in the neighborhood may face exactly this problem, that many of adults and kids are not really having any education because of this situation.
Well, we've never had more smartphones in Asia. You know, the average person has 2 or 3 smartphones. So you have education. My children, you know, they're 3 years old and 5 years old. I purchased smartphones, much to my own dismay, in COVID, because I wanted them to have a consistent curriculum, and I wanted to be able to monitor their progress, and I wanted to be able to see how they learned on those devices. They are truly digital natives now, I must say. And I have tried every single program you can imagine, of course, as somebody who is in higher education, to ensure that my child, through that smartphone, was going to get access to quality education. And of course, in COVID-19, many of these academic institutions have made their programs available at no cost. So I would argue, as long as you had a smartphone, in principle, you could be included. But one of the challenges is, of course, is what we ask of a student in the classroom. So you asked me, how do we learn? How do adults learn? Some people learn by listening. Some people learn by seeing. Some people learn by writing it down. Some people learn by experiential learning. They have to physically do it to be able to, and experience to be able to understand it. And these different ways of learning and the ways in which we operate are very important to understand. I learn by hearing, Marguerite, and I learn by writing it down. If I don't hear it and I don't write it down, I don't learn it. Another colleague of mine learns by reading. Unless she's read it, it doesn't work for her. So, you know, we have different approaches in which we are normed to consume knowledge and information. And then the second challenge we have, of course, as you know, is that we're inundated with this overload of information. And so many of the approaches to education that we've done at a higher education level have had to change. Now, we've been practicing a pandemic here in Singapore for many, many years. But Marguerite, this semester I'm unemployed because this year our MBA program was completely cancelled, right? And we've been practicing for years and years.
You didn't decide even to go online with the lectures. It was just stopped, right?
Well, I think we were starting in January. This is when we started to put down the travel restrictions. It was a on-campus education program at the time, and people just didn't want to travel. Even if they could legally travel at the time, they didn't want to travel. And now I can tell you, I made a recommendation of a student onto my alumni program, TRIUM, and they declined the opportunity to go to one of the most top-ranked universities in the world because they would physically have to go to the US to do a module, and they didn't want to travel to the US. So we are now living in a time of great immobility. And one of the challenges is a US passport, which before was valid in more than 150 countries, is now as good as a passport from Botswana. So these COVID times have put some very interesting constraints on us as academic institutions. And if we were not able to adapt fast enough to be agile, then we really did miss an opportunity. And for us, we decided in this particular program that we were going to take this year to update the curriculum, to re-examine what were the needs of our students post-COVID-19, and then come back next year on a much stronger footing. I'm now freelancing in SMU Cox in Texas. So here I am in Singapore supporting a class, an MBA class in Texas. And I just had 11 founders bring their companies and their challenges to this class, and over a 3-day period run an innovation sprint. And in that 3 days, these students immersed themselves into the shoes of our founders to understand the challenges that they were facing in pivoting their companies during COVID-19, and to write a strategy on what they should do moving forward. Now, how often does a student in Texas get the opportunity to work with a crop intelligence farming education institution in Southeast Asia, or a respiratory health company in Singapore? It was just amazing.
That would be my question, because, you know, there is a lot of discussions around future of education. There are some people who say, okay, the future is really online, especially at the university level, because it opens up, you know, all the possibilities for exchanges, for even teaching permanently or abroad without traveling. But there are some other people who say, no, that's not, it's not going to happen, because we really, human beings, want also to physically be somewhere. So maybe the hybrid system will remain. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I came from that system. So 20 years ago, when I was doing my master's, I was an entrepreneur building companies during the day and studying in the wee hours of the morning. Nothing has really changed, Margarita. And I did it because I had this incredible job. I was building startup companies that today, you know, one just got a $60 billion exit in the US market. And I was playing with that in the very early days, right? Building these companies from the ground up. And I didn't want to forego that opportunity to go back to university in a full-time campus mode. So 20 years ago, when it wasn't the rage, I was an online MBA student. And my circles of learning were incredible. I was with the head of Uganda Telecom. I had the head of Deutsche Bank, the head of ABN AMRO. And we're still in touch today, 20 odd years later. And so at that time, my little rural university in Australia, University of Southern Queensland, was the best online academic institution in the Southern Hemisphere, because they were stuck in the middle of this country town, and the only way they could operate as an institution was to go global and online. Here today, of course, you've got the traditional academic institutions like mine, TRIUM, NYU, HSC, LSE, which sold me a program back in 2012 of a mixed mode, exactly what you described. So we had 6 modules, 2-week intensives in 6 countries around the world. And the rest of the time, it was all online. And I was among more than 40 different nationalities with people from age 30 to 55. And I made some of the most incredible connections that, you know, are serving me today in my communities and in my career. And so I genuinely have benefited from that multimodal education style. And I do believe that it can work. And I also believe that as an entrepreneur, everyone argues, well, you know, as an entrepreneur, why do you need to go back to a classical education system? But I would argue that that's why I think so sharply now. You know, my creative and critical thinking skills came from the fact that I sharpened my saw in a classical education system. I had the opportunity to do valuations with the best valuation professor in the world, Dr. Aswath Damodaran, who today I can still drop an email to and check my math, right? You know, I did competitive strategy with Sonia out of Chicago Booth. I mean, some of the most incredible academic institutions in the world. And I think what I would say is anyone that sees an academic program as a product has actually missed the opportunity. If you look at an academic institution or program as a product, you're not actually really going to get the benefit, because we have to serve the middle of the class, right? We have to make sure that we're really serving the bulk of the people in the class. And there will always be, in different topics, high achievers or low achievers in a particular topic. But if you view an academic program as a platform, so, you know, for me, I went back to classical education, and module 3, I must say, I was probably deep in the depths of exhaustion by that point, having a full-time job and doing this executive MBA. But I had lost the perspective. I was viewing it as a product. I wasn't viewing it as a platform. As soon as I changed that mindset, all of a sudden the world was my oyster. I was sat in a class and I had Bernard Borgo, the founder of Atos Origin, giving us a lecture. And after class, I said, oh, I've just got a startup working in this mode. Would you be considered to join as a board of advisors? He said, absolutely, send me more information. And he joined the board as an advisor. We forged a venture fund among some alumni in my class. You know, we're doing agriculture in Brazil with some colleagues in our class. We took a community out of poverty in Tamil Nadu in India over 3 years with a group of people in my class. So, you know, there's so much opportunity if you view it as a lifelong platform.
And it's also a network, which is absolutely key for the business people. So for us adults, learning is not only really learning, but it's also meeting people, interacting, you know, being inspired by somebody else who can give us a case study. And that's all about education as well. Yes. You cover also artificial intelligence. That's your lecture during Masters in Robot conference, right? What will be exactly the topic?
So I'm talking about AI in the context of smart cities and our climate resilience in society.
Right.
And what do the futures look like? And what are those disruptive technologies that are really going to change the game for us in societies for climate adaptation and resilience?
So without touching this topic, I would like to ask you about artificial intelligence in education. Do you see any ways we can, you know, implement this in education? If yes, in what form?
Yes, so I worked on a project for the last 5 years. It was a public safety and security project with education applications. So for example, for fight detection on campus, for suicide prevention on certain floors of the building using AI and sensor detection, for classroom engagement. So to understand, was I actually losing half the classroom during this particularly complex problem as I was explaining it, and actually monitoring fatigue of a student during a course. Now, to be fair, we're not implementing all of those things today, but there are certain countries that are, as you know. One of the key areas where we really saw it as an important opportunity was in the examination process. You can no longer cheat the system and have somebody else ever sit an exam, because we know exactly who you are as you come in the room. And I think that is a wonderful thing that we actually can now determine, you know, that we save probably 3 minutes per student, right, in the checking of that identification process. Now we can just go straight to the examination. So it's about automating those administrative tasks that were laborious, but also providing us with the insights in order to be able to adapt our learning modes to suit the audiences that we have more efficiently. And of course, to protect the public safety and security of our students as they're learning.
Fascinating, fascinating reality is in front of us. Let's see how this new normal will look like finally. We are still living under, let's say, under construction in a situation where the pandemic is still there. So not everything we are doing now will remain, but some of the things we are facing now, they are really good, and I think they will stay with us for good. Leesa, thank you very much for your time. Thanks also for accepting the invitation for Masters and Robots this year. So I hope you guys, everybody, will join us on 22nd of September for this fascinating conference. Thank you, Leesa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.